All right, so we'll get started with just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you to Creator for this day. Nas, Waikash Nas Yahweh, Waikash Nas Yeshua, Waikash Nas Adonai. Kleko Kleko Yahweh Hahufi Hishuk Ish Sawak. Kleko Kleko Yeshua Hatwe Suna Uyatlak Asma. Kleko Adonai Niwasnish Nisma Isak Tukunolam. And just recognizing the interconnection of all things, and the elders who inspire us to be our best selves, to be in service to others and our families, with the home fires. Thinking of my elder, Larry McDermott, who'll be joining us tomorrow, and the home fires, those who keep the home fires going for us. Obviously now with the Zoom revolution, we're more able to be at our home fires ourselves. So not as much travel for conferences and such, but yeah, very much grateful to our families and for everyone who's joined us today for this important conversation about the 2022 Valentine's Zaag'idiwin event, talking about watershed love today, and about the importance of watershed level reconciliation in terms of many people have said that reconciliation is dead, that the crown governments have kind of abused that word. And so what is possible? We're not going to give up. There's opportunities to continue to move forward certain programs with the federal or provincial governments, but also at the watershed level, where we work collaboratively in many cases with non-Indigenous communities to forward meaningful reconciliation that will last into the future. And so this is the subject for today's conversation. I want to acknowledge the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, who's one of our co-hosts this year, and RJC Engineering, who's also co-hosting the event with us. Our broader kind of vision is rooted in a conversation in 2020 on New Year's Eve between David Suzuki and myself, where we were talking about exactly that, about how reconciliation with the Crown governments have failed Indigenous peoples in many cases. And this was, in the aftermath of military-style intervention and of pipeline protesters that were peaceful. And today that is back in the public eye again, when we see the freedom rallies getting handled with kid gloves by police forces, and just a difference in treatment in terms of the freedom convoy versus Indigenous protests. And so anyways, in New Year's Eve, Suzuki and I were talking about how we can invoke ideas of Indigenous concepts of economy and different paradigms of relationship. And this is where the concept of Zaag'idiwin came up. We had the benefit of having Dr. John Burrows from the University of Victoria Indigenous Law Faculty to share with us about this concept of Zaag'idiwin and how it is derived in the language, the Anishinaabe language, from observations in natural law, and how the river, with so many tributaries, brings nutrients to the lake, where it deposits those nutrients and fosters that abundance. And so we're looking to emulate that in our human relations. And how can we, rather than having a transactional relationship, how can we have a relationship of abundance? And this is really coming home with this idea of watershed love, and where we live and where we share, go to the same grocery stores and the same post offices. How can we cultivate better reconciliation at that watershed level? I'm very happy to have Diane Rusin with us today. I've admired Diane for many years. She's doing innovative things in basically the center of North America. Winnipeg is pretty much in the middle of it all, where the two big rivers come together at the forks. Diane has been a driving force in the Winnipeg Boldness project for years. And I also, I've tried to get her out to come to our IPCA gatherings a few times. I haven't made it yet, but now with the virtual reality, we're more easily getting her to come out. But maybe we'll even get her to Tofino in the near future, I'm hoping. Now that we have good accommodations to put her up. So yeah, I'll pass the feather over to you, Diane, to share your thoughts on Valentine's Zaag'idiwin. We have a few rough ideas in terms of your experience in working with municipalities, but whatever inspires you to share today, the floor is yours.
Awesome, Miigwech. Thank you for starting us like that, Eli. It's always good when we start things in a good way. It sets the energy and sets us up for having a really good conversation and discussion. So just want to acknowledge and say thank you to everyone that is in the circle today. I see my colleague Nigel here, and I recognize him from in the same area that I'm in right now. Maybe there's others. So first thing I'll do is introduce who I am, sort of where I come from. And I realize now that is sort of how I always start. And when I'm sitting in circles, I always want to know, who are you and who's your mom, and what land are you from, or what land do you associate your people with, or, and I recognize that some of us don't always know that, because some of us have been stolen and taken away. And so we're just trying to find our pathways back to that. So I want to acknowledge that as well. But yeah, I am Anishinaabe, and I have Métis heritage as well. My dad was, he's not with us anymore, he's passed away, but he was a card-carrying Métis and very active within the Métis movement. But we could get into all the identity politics. I don't actually have a Métis card, so I always hesitate about saying that, but definitely I have a heritage and very proud of that heritage. Most of my association is with my mother's family. And so my mother was physically born on the land of Skowhenan First Nation, which is about 3.5 hours northwest of Winnipeg in Treaty 2 territory. So that is where I consider to be home and my people. And it always occurs to me, so lots of what you're going to hear me talk about today is the centering of Indigenous wisdom and centering indigeneity, and really reconnecting or shining a light on Indigenous wisdoms and Indigenous approaches and, our knowledge systems, which have been interrupted a little bit, with in the last couple 100 years, I'd say. But it always occurs to me that my mother was physically born. And so she was born in April. And as I understand it, there was not a lot of roads in the First Nations community at that time. And there would have been a lot of snow on the ground. And so when she was coming into this world, my cuckoo couldn't get out and couldn't get anywhere else. And so so then the aunties, we call them little aunties, but the cuckoos and the aunties brought my mom into the world. And I hear those stories all the time. It's my mom has got 16 brothers and sisters. And so how the oldest brother had take the boys off over to Cuckoo Sarah's, and then my oldest aunt would have taken the young girls off to a different auntie, and then my mom was brought into the world in a little two room, very basic house with no running water, no electricity, and none of that kind of stuff. So, but my mom is now in her 70s and just we have that wisdom. We know how to bring our kids into this world. You know, I guess in today's day, we might call that midwives. I don't think we use that language necessarily back then, but we knew how to do that, right? And so this, you know, we do have Western options now in hospitals and things like that, but and so it's good to have those choices. So Treaty 2, that's where I associate home and my people, and I know that line all the way back, right? And so there was like, it would have been a great grandfather way down the line that would have signed the Treaty 2 documents and agreements. But right now I am situated in Treaty 1 territory, which is otherwise known as Winnipeg, Manitoba. And as Eli was saying, the sort of center of the country in some ways. And I want to start, Eli, with a little bit, it is a land acknowledgement, but it's also a story. And so it takes a little bit more time, but I think it's very relevant to our conversation today about watershed and love. And so we are, Treaty 1, Winnipeg, is situated in these traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene people. So those are historically folks that were here and stewarded this land all these years, right? Before before settlers came to Canada or came to these lands. And so, again, of course, I'm completely biased, but I just think our knowledge systems, our approaches, even how we can considerations of love and interrelationality and interconnectedness, the things Eli was talking about, how that led us to being really good stewards of the land and being in balance with the land. And I'll say a lot more about that later. And so that we are still able to enjoy the benefits of all my relations, of the water, of the land to this day. And so the story I want to tell about, and I also want to say that this is also the homeland of the Metis Nation, and I want to talk about that as a little bit more too. The story I want to tell around the First Nations folks is that the city of Winnipeg, there was people here before it was even a city, right? Obviously, and the rivers was a natural place because it was a natural trading route, and so the Indigenous people were on that route before settlers came, right? And so naturally, when the settlers came, it was a natural place for settlers to go to trade and to commerce and to learn and to do all the things. And we can go into all the stories. I'm taking a course right now about the history of Canada through the lens of Indigenous women. And so the real massive role that Indigenous women played in helping settlers figure out how to live here and in this climate and on these lands, and how to, feed yourself and sustain and all the things. So it's quite interesting to see that lens on it, and encourage you to look into that if you have the time. But fast forwarding into the 1900s, and Nigel, you might know some of this history as well. There was Winnipeg was starting to grow a little, but it had hit a point where it couldn't grow anymore. And it couldn't grow anymore because it didn't have clean water. And so there was this phenomena going around, and it was the Red River fever. And so people didn't want to come here anymore because people were getting sick from drinking the water, because the water wasn't filtered in any way, shape, or form. It was just coming right out of the river. And so there was a push, right, from businesses and citizens and others who wanted to grow Winnipeg to say, we need clean water. So there was an actual mayor or a mayoralty candidate who ran on the ticket of, I'm going to bring clean water to Winnipeg. That was the campaign. And I want to say it was like 1900 something that mayoral campaign was active. Interestingly enough, and there's a film called Urban Eclipse by Jesse Green. If you get a chance, it's about an hour and a half. It's like the most fascinating documentary. If you get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend it. And in that film, this is where I heard he says, he explains a lot of this. And interestingly enough, the biggest push for clean water came from the business community, and it came from the insurance companies, because as businesses were trying to thrive in the downtown of what's known as downtown Winnipeg right now, which is where the two rivers meet, buildings were burning. And I guess when they were trying to use the water from the rivers, there was too much sludge in there, and it was at times being more of a flame enhancer. And so it wasn't a good way for it wasn't safe, right? And so insurance companies wouldn't insure businesses. And so really that was the biggest push to get clean water to Winnipeg. And so here we had a mayoralty race, and that was a ticket. And shortly thereafter, and I don't know, I can't recall if that mayor won. I think it was Deacon, but it would have been his name running on that ticket. But it was just shortly after that. I mean, it was inevitable, I think, right? And so the mayor, of course, beats a trail down to Ottawa, cuts a deal with Ottawa for this clean water thing, and they agreed to do this aqueduct thing. And so the feds go and expropriate all the land at Shoal Lake 40, which is a First Nations community by the Manitoba-Ontario border, and just cuts that community right in half, just takes the land, and we know the story in Canada, just expropriates the land, doesn't care what that community thinks, doesn't care what the devastation that's going to happen to that community, and builds this massive aqueduct, and then Winnipeg gets clean drinking water. So we've been enjoying clean drinking water since, I want to say 1915, 1918, somewhere in and around there. And Shoal Lake 40, just in 2021, Shoal Lake 40 finally got a water filtration system there, and they finally can turn the tap on, just a couple months ago, can finally turn their tap on and finally drink clean drinking water. 2021, like September or October. It's so ridiculous. But so we've been drinking their water forever in Winnipeg. And they finally just, and again, there's films about Shoal Lake 40. There's lots of really good films that can tell you that whole story about the devastation that community has had to go through so that Winnipeg can have clean drinking water, and that this city can prosper the way it's prospered as a result of, partially as a result of having that clean water, and without regard for the devastation of that community. And that community is still suffering from all that devastation, even though they now have some clean drinking water. The devastation has been obviously all these years, and it's going to continue for a long, long time, right? The effects of that devastation is going to continue for that community for a long, long time. So that's a story about water and how it connects to, this municipality. The other story I want to tell is that 70% of our electricity here in Manitoba is generated from the Nelson River, which is mostly up in Treaty 5 territory. And so we in Manitoba have these massive hydroelectric dams. And so again, I'm sitting here on Zoom and I got my lights on and I'm drinking my coffee. So I enjoy electricity here in Winnipeg. And we enjoy that electricity, again, at the full devastation of Treaty 5 communities, because we flood them out. We don't really care that they have to relocate, and sometimes permanently relocate. We don't really care about the devastation to their natural, territories and areas. And then we've had, and again, I always keep pointing at Nigel here, but we have communities that are living in hotels and have been living in hotels in Winnipeg for years because we dislocate them and dislocate their territories, right? And so it seems like that's not a big deal, and we don't really care too much about it because we're not really doing much to alleviate it or to have, a satisfactory kind of solution that is satisfactory to the First Nations communities. And so again, just always in the land acknowledgements, always wanting to show and tell how stewards of the land, did such a great job, and we continue to enjoy the benefit of that stewardship. And yet we've done awful things to those communities that we still have not rectified, and there's no apparent pathway to that. I mean, we're talking a lot about Tier C these days, but in some of these situations, there is no reconciliation conversations that I can tell, like economic reconciliation or what have you. And so, and maybe I'm being a little bit pessimistic about that, but there needs a lot more. We need a lot more to be done, right? And we need to see the benefits of these things actually benefit First Nation and Métis people, because so far that benefit has been fairly one-sided, right? In terms of non-Indigenous and non-Métis people. And so then the third story I want to tell you is about the Métis Nation and how, you know, we are here in the homeland of the Métis Nation, like the Red River settlement area. And, you know, Louis Riel was here when Canada was trying to get this area into Confederation. And so it wasn't quite Manitoba just yet as a province. And Louis Riel, you know, was a leader that was trying to defend the land, defend their area. And so until pretty recently, you know, Louis Riel was characterized as a rebel, as like that he had mental health issues, that you know, he was like this renegade and so was a bad guy, right? Like doing bad things, and was an outlaw. Like that's how has until most recently been characterized by most of mainstream society. Now we're going, oh my gosh, he's the father of Manitoba because he actually negotiated with the federal government to bring Manitoba into Confederation. And so he does have the credit and the title of being the father of Manitoba. And that's not really a history we know much about, right? The most recent history was, oh, he's this crazy guy, you know, leading a band of rebels, versus the father of Manitoba, right? And getting the credit for the sophisticated strategy that he employed to make a lot of these things happen. So again, when we talk about land acknowledgements, like these are the stories that I feel are super interesting, not very well known. And because they're not being taught in schools, it's not in our curriculums, it's not in our universities, not in our elementary schools. And so hopefully that's changing as well, that more and more of general public would know these things and understand these things, and then maybe have a better understanding of why the Indigenous communities are in the situations that they're in. And so want to give a little shout out, obviously, to our friend tomorrow, Caroline Hilton, and the Indigenomics book. I mean, and John Burroughs, like lots of people have written about this stuff. But really, we need more writing about it, but to really show how, you know, the systematic economic exclusion of Indigenous peoples over the history of time has led to where we're at. And then what do we need to do to change that and rectify that and create those pathways forward for reconciliation? So I'm going to just pause there before I launch into love. And Eli, is there anything or anybody, I don't know how you want to deal with.
Well, that's brilliant. Very, thank you for that in-depth land acknowledgement. As you were speaking, I was reminded of, in terms of Watershed, I believe that one of the things that Louis Riel and the French Canadians were fairly adamant about was the way that agricultural tenures would be allocated in narrow strips going out from the rivers, as opposed to the British approach of having squares where only certain people would have waterfront farmlands, and then there was a secondary group of farmlands behind them that didn't have the same readily accessible water supply. And so there was a kind of class system that would evolve. And so just also thinking back to the French Canadian and British sort of dichotomy in what had happened during those years. So yeah, thanks for bringing us back into the history. And then the last reflection was, I think it was 2012, where there were promises made in those negotiations that you speak of for the Métis Nation to have lands in what is today known as Winnipeg, and that was sort of not made good on. And just now in 2012, I believe it was, it made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized that, yeah, there's all these lands that were meant to be given to the Metis Nation. And then I think just more broadly, the the observation of the fact that not just dams, but like the Riding Mountain National Park, the creation of Riding Mountain National Park that displaced many folks from there, and then the channelizing of Indigenous peoples into urban centers, where of course there was conflict with the Canadian justice system and this sort of criminalization of indigeneity that has led to so much incarceration of our peoples over the years, sets the stage for a difficult uphill battle for the conversation about reconciliation, for sure. But yeah, thank you, Diane. And yeah, please do go on with your insights into love.
All right, let's talk about love. And so, Eli, with everything you just said there, when I talk about love, for me, I want to talk about, again, Indigenous knowledge systems that I'm aware of, which tend to be primarily Anishinaabe. So I want to acknowledge that it's one Indigenous knowledge system. There are many, many across this country. We are so diverse. And so wherever you are today, anyone in this circle, you obviously have lots of wise Indigenous knowledge systems in wherever you physically are. So hopefully you're aware of them, and hopefully you've been able to see the beauty and benefit from that beauty of those knowledge systems. So mostly I speak from that Indigenous or Anishinaabe place, because that's what I've been taught. And I never, if anyone knows me, I never ever put myself up as any expert about anything. All I can do is just share my experience with you and share the wisdom that I feel has been passed down to me or been transferred to me. And so it's my responsibility to try to pass it on to others, right? And so that's how I always view anything that I share. It's never about expertise. It's just more, here's my experience, and here's what seems to make sense to me in this world. And if it resonates with you, great. And if it doesn't, you can leave it right here. I think that's how our teachings always go. Take what you need and leave what you don't. But hopefully I always feel like a lot of these conversations, hopefully they're seeds, right? And hopefully they just spark lots and lots more questions that you can now go forward from this circle and just pursue those questions, with all the different conversations you're having around you and in your place. So when I think about love and Valentine's Day and things like that, I think about, the seven, it goes by different names, but it is a knowledge system, 7 sacred laws or 7 grandfather teachings that get associated with animals, obviously. And so, there is the teachings of, let's see if I can name them off the top of my head: love, wisdom, respect, truth, humility, honesty. What else am I missing? Courage. I always think about the animals. So these 7 teachings all have pretty significant wisdom within each of them, but they are super interconnected. And so I always feel like love is the ultimate one, because it's what brings all the other 6 together. And that teaching is symbolized by the eagle. And so again, you can kind of Google that if you want, and there's lots on the internet about that. But there's also, if you speak to people around you, a lot of people around you probably will know about these teachings as well. And so there's lots within each of these teachings, but I'll just sort of skim a little bit. But how I think about love is how it's about unconditional love. And it's about loving all my relations. And so that's very connected to Anishinaabe teachings around medicine wheel. And so medicine wheel is about being in balance. It's about thinking in terms of interconnectedness. It's about, we have this saying in Anishinaabe, and there's a version of it in Cree as well, but Mino Bamadziwin, which means living the good life. And I feel like, all of our knowledge systems are helping us to figure out how to live a good life. And part of living a good life is to be in balance with all my relations. And so you hear us talk about Grandmother Moon, Mother Earth, these are all my relations. It's not human centric. And so all, we have the trees and the land and the water, like these are all my relations. And so so our viewpoint is, how might we live in balance and peace and harmony with all my relations? And I do feel that can be very different. And I did a little bit of a TED talk on this. Hopefully you have a motherly figure in your life, a maternal presence in your life. And so, personally, I do have my mom. And when I think about my mom, I think about, how can I make my mom happy? What can I do to make sure that my mom is healthy and that she is at peace, and that, medicine wheel teachings of physical, like how can I make sure that she's physically good? We talk about intellectual, like how can I help to ensure, excuse me, that just came out of nowhere, pardon me. But how can I make sure, that intellectually her, she's in a good place. And then there's emotional and spiritual. And so when I think about my mom, I think about all of those aspects of being, and what might I do to ensure that she's good in those ways. My children adore my mother. And so I'm always trying to figure out how to create those connections between my mom and my children in all of those aspects of being, as well as myself, right? And so, and then family members. So when we think about Mother Earth, hopefully we're thinking about Mother Earth in this way. But it seems to me that a lot of, primarily, I guess in Canada, we have a lot of Western paradigms. We don't think about, well, when we're thinking about our mothers, hopefully we're not thinking, how might I extract every bit of value out of my mother that I can? And that's a one-way street. Like, I just want to get as much out of her as I can, and I don't care about her. Right. And so let's just extract. And that's a transactional view, right? How might I control her? How might I manage her? That sounds ridiculous when we're talking about a human being. But when we talk about the water, we're like, let's control this water. Let's manage this water. Let's extract every bit of value we can out of this water. And then I don't feel like we're really thinking about all my relations in a reciprocal, mutual, interconnected kind of way, by and large, right? Like, I think we understand it to some degree, but I don't think our behaviors line up that way a whole lot, to know that we're so interconnected. And then, so for me, that's about centering relationality, right? Centering relationship. And if we center relationality, then we are like, then it is the mutual, right? And it's the reciprocal. And I feel like a lot of, when we talk about, it takes a village to raise a child, a lot of boldness, and I can talk a little bit about boldness in a bit. When we're talking about that village concept, and again, I don't think this is not exclusive to Indigenous people. I think lots of cultures around the world have these values and approaches of the village, and knowing that, I think some of our early childhood science tells us that, every child needs 5 adults around to thrive, right? And so the idea of living in a village where you can have peace and security, which is at the core of love, it's knowing that you will always be taken care of, and then knowing that you have a responsibility to always take care of. And so I've seen this happen in my community, where it's one of the stories I tell is like waking up. My mom lives in Zaag'idiwin First Nation, and my dad, her lived there until my dad passed away. And waking up, and like, sorry, my mom is still there, but waking up and opening the door in the wintertime, and there's like a hind quarter of a deer sitting there, and you're like, oh, where'd that come from? Like, somebody just dropped it off, right? Or waking up, and then in the summertime, and my dad going, oh, lawnmower's gone. Like, someone took, like, didn't steal it, but someone took the lawnmower because they need to go mow their lawn, And so we know it's like, it's not, it didn't get stolen. Like, we just got to go get it now, right? If we need it back. so like this broader, you will be taken care of, and then you have to take care of. So if you know that at your core, I think it combats, or it's an opposition to the scarcity mentality and this poverty mentality of I'm not going to have enough and therefore I need to be freaking out because where am I going to get my next meal? And so that breeds like an insecurity, right? And that breeds just unwellness and really messes with our mental health, I feel. So I really do feel like Western paradigms are based on those kinds of approaches and values, whereas Indigenous values are different. I think our implementation of those values and approaches has severely been interrupted with colonization and things like Indian Act and all these systems that dictate how we're going to live our lives. We can get into that, and Eli didn't talk about that just a little bit earlier. And I was thinking, I always want to talk about centering indigeneity always first, but I cannot ignore and don't ignore how so many of our systems, and you name it, justice, education, government, like you name it, many of those systems are built by somebody, and they're usually not built by Indigenous people. They usually do not take into account our value base. They do not take into account our experiences. They do not take into account our approaches and our knowledge systems. And then yet a lot of those systems are supposed to be built for our benefit, for our, as a society. And so the examples in Manitoba are, I'll use one, child welfare system. That's the one I know the most. And I'm using 2018 numbers because those are the most current ones that I have right now. In 2018, over 11,000 children were in the care of Child and Family Services. 90 to 95% of those children were Indigenous. $500 million that system cost our provincial government, according to their annual reports in 2018. So there's money there. When you follow that dollar, where does that $500 million go? Very little of it hits the Indigenous community in a positive way. It mostly is going to the system, lawyers, hotels, like we put kids up in hotels, and we're trying to stop that, but we still do. So it goes to all of these services and resources that are supposed to be there for the kids and their families. But again, without having our experiences, it's not built on our viewpoints and experiences. So those systems, often are not helpful, and at their super worst are harming us. And there is starting to be a lot more research, that longitudinal stuff that is starting to show the longer you are in the care of the child welfare state, the worse your health and wellness outcomes are on all kinds of fronts. You are more likely to be homeless. You are more likely to have mental health issues. You are more likely to not have education, to not have financial, means, to not have employment, to not start a business even, right? And so getting back into the economics of it. So that those numbers do not mean that Indigenous people do not know how to parent their children. I was just saying, my mom came into this world from the aunties and cuckoos, brought her into this world, right? We know how to parent our kids. Systems get in the way and at their worst harm us in our ability to look after our kids the way we want to look after our kids, in the way that we think. And I think a lot of those systems are built on that survival and scarcity, and let's just give people just enough that they have to tread water. That is a survival system, not a thriving. And I know in Boldness, when we go around asking our families, what does it take to take care of children? They do not start the conversation from survival. They talk about thriving. And I'll get into the example, but we were looking at the baby box thing here in Manitoba because there was this infant mortality issue in the city. And some of our medical community immediately went, well, safe sleep solution. So a box, right? Like where a baby can sleep inside this box so that the babies are not having this sudden death phenomena. And when we went to our community and asked the question about what should we do about this issue, they immediately went into, why would we talk about just keeping the baby alive with this box? Like, that's not where they wanted to start the conversation. They immediately said, how can our babies thrive? And immediately the conversations went into, we need lots of resourcing around families. Like, if families are stressed out, like if they need education around safe sleeping, fine. But mostly they probably need help, and mostly they probably need to be connected to each other. Mostly they probably need to have like, cultural teachings. They need access to other parents. Like, our community just took it in a whole different, so then the solution, so they identified the problem differently, and then they identified the solution differently. And so often in these systems, that's what you'll see. If we're not involved in the problem identification, then we're probably not going to be involved in the solution finding either. But even involving us at the problem identification part will shape where the solution is going to go. And so often we're just not, right? And then somebody somewhere creates, and I'm in this social innovation world where everybody likes to do startups and hackathons and everything else. And I like to come up with this cool idea, and then they want to impose it on us, because it's a really cool idea that they think will work. And we're like, oh man, like, involve us in at the very start and at the very beginning, right? And the ideas will be even more cool, and we might actually use them. So now that story I just told about child welfare, that phenomena holds across every system. You go to justice, again, conservatively speaking, 70% of those incarcerated are Indigenous. And I think the justice system costs us way more than a child welfare system. You go, and again, it's not to say we're criminals. There is something going on there that's creating those numbers, right? A system is in place that is creating those numbers. It is not because Indigenous people are all criminals or we have a criminal mind. Mental health, education, like, you just keep going, right? Business, who's starting businesses in this country, right? It's not like Indigenous people know how to commerce, like we know how to enterprise, but there's systems in place, particularly Indian Act and First Nations instances, that just we're just locked right out of like even the financial game, right? And again, I point at my friend Nigel here, he knows a lot about this stuff, in terms of access to capital or access to asset and security, right? So we actually have a piece of legislation in this country that prevents that from happening. So I really wanted to make the point that there are lots of wise Indigenous practices out there. However, there's a lot of systems out there that are trying to stamp it out, interfere, harm. And so it really is an uphill battle, right? It's a constant fight a lot of the time. And I think you'll probably, many in the circle hopefully are familiar with the idea that, like, in order for me to go out and defend who I am and how I am and my way of life, I'm labeled an activist just to be me. Like, and so, the land defenders out there, the water protectors and water defenders, like, in order for them to protect that, they're usually kind of labeled as activists. And which is not I'm not opposed to that word, but it's somehow, there is in some circles a negative connotation to that word, right? And somehow, like, we're being difficult, so anyway, I can get up on my soapbox about that too. So I want to stop there again and just do a pause and see what's resonating for folks or where we might want to go next.
I'm just enthralled, Diane. So I love your clarity and the insights that you're providing. And so let me put my glasses back on here. You've mentioned Nigel a couple times. I'm wondering if he has something he wants to reflect or add in there.
And Nigel, say whatever you want to say, but I will say Nigel has worked in the Indigenous community for quite some time and has seen many of our struggles, has, been an ally. And I know I've given him a hard time a few times there, but
not at all, not at all. Let me just first of all say, Gretchen, thank you for just for hosting this important conversation. And for someone like me that works for a local credit union, it's always trying to learn and that learning is listening to those that as Diane said, that are impacted by, you know, the systems and structures that have been created by others, who fail to see how those systems continue to create barriers and have outcomes that that is not healthy, not sustainable. It might be for a very small percentage that it's sustainable and healthy, but for the majority, it's not. And, you know, when Diane, you know, always learn so much when you share, when you talk about some of the 2018 statistics, for example, of our kids in Manitoba alone, and that's just Manitoba, right? We should all be ashamed, right? That we allow a system like this to perpetuate, that still has so many of our children, our future generation, in such a disadvantaged position. So I think, you know, for me, you know, when you ask the question, Isaac, about reflection, it's just, you know, bringing some of these truths to light again and bringing it to the forefront. And whatever path we are on, whether it's individual, personally, or profession, you know, my work, for example, with the credit union, providing financing for nonprofits and small business. Diane hit it on the head. Any banker would tell you that, you know, in order to increase your wealth, increase your capital, increase intergenerational wealth, you need access to assets, and access to capital becomes so much more difficult if you don't have assets. So there are systemic, and I like what you said earlier, Diane, about systemic economic exclusion. If we think about those three words together that you just shared, it's systematic, and there's economic inclusion. The one other word I can throw in there is yeah, part of being systematic is being intentional, right? So I am learning a lot, Eli, and you know, listening to my sister here speak, and it's just challenging to, again, personally, but also thinking about the work that I do, and how does this information help to change the approach, the narrative, the practices, and allow us to really have a voice in being one of those, what did you say, Diane? A protester? Not a bad thing. Activist, yeah. Being an activist to change things for the better for all. So miigwech, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for those words, Nigel. And as you were speaking, I was, and you're talking about the intentional aspect of systematic. I go back to the quelling or the oppression of the so-called Red River Rebellion, the Northwest Resistance, and how it seems to be very plausible. And I kind of come about this from a perspective of growing up between two provinces. Half my life really rooted in Manitoba, and the rest of my life very much in British Columbia. There's a different texture of racism and the human experience in a Manitoba setting that I was very aware of, even as a child, going back and forth between the two provinces. And as I learned more about the geopolitical evolution of Canada, it kind of struck me as an obvious, yeah, well, they made promises to the Metis and the Indigenous peoples to allow for the railway to come through. They didn't want to make good on those promises. They knew that a potential renaissance of that resistance would be inevitable. And so these systems were established to become a systematic sort of quelling of that resistance. And the resistance lives on. I mean, I remember my oldest daughter, Justine, is Anishinaabe from Rolling River and Ebb and Flow, Manitoba. And I remember meeting her grandmother, and she spoke about how, actually it was her great grandmother, it was Audrey's grandmother that, you know, told me about the, you know, the role that we have to continue the resistance, and how the aunties educated us about our rights with regards to police oppression and such. And so, yeah, you're right, Nigel. There's when you look at the systems and how they are disproportionately impacting a certain demographic, logic tells you maybe there's that intentionality. And I think this is really stating the obvious for a lot of people here. Now, how do we shift towards solutions? And I don't know, maybe that's where Diane will take us next with sharing about the Boldness project and your ideas about this, Diane.
Yeah. So, and again, just some of the things we're seeing in our community and in our neighborhood, and the wisdom that's being shared by, you know, our parents and our elders and our community leaders. But I will say another last little piece, and I'm pretty sure you can Google this as well. And I was saying that I have Métis heritage as well. And so that's the Rusyn side. My mom is a Nipanak, a maiden name Nipanak, and my dad is the Rusyn. And so tracing that history, you know, again, like everybody else, there's a connection there to L'Oreal. And growing up, I didn't understand, it seemed weird to me. I didn't understand why the Rusyns had like St. Rose, there was a connection to the St. Rose area. And I always thought, this is weird. Like, why do we have this connection? And I realized, and as I started learning more about history, you know, the whole Métis script piece, right? And that was the taking of the land, in the Red River settlement. And so, because Canada Canada as a country just needed the land. I mean, that's all what residential schools was about. That's what the Indian Act's about. Like, everything is about getting the land. That's what all of that is about. It's separating Indigenous people from the land. And whatever strategies need to be employed to separate people from the land, that's what this is all about. And so with the Métis script, it was the same thing, right? Like, so folks, there was what would have been deemed, you know, some level of inappropriateness there by the courts. And so saying, you know, Indigenous people are entitled to some land back through this Métis script process. And so, you know, more or less, this is not entirely, the wording I'm going to use here is more storytelling, but it's the idea that, you know, you could get this little piece of paper that we call script. And on that little piece of paper, it would say you're entitled to X amount of land. And then you got to go through that whole process of identifying that land. And if in the story that you'll see online, that I read online, was, you know, you could see Métis people sort of lined up at the government office, going in one door, getting their little piece of paper, Métis script, and then coming out the other door. And then there's a banker set up there on a little folding table, which is and those folks were the Champion and Alloway people, those folks are the forerunners of the CIBC Bank. And Mr. Alloway here in Winnipeg is known for a lot of things. He was a well-known philanthropist, Mr. Alloway. And these were the folks who bought up that Métis script for quite a bargain, right? And so so that's how, you know, again, the transfer of land happens through things like that, right? And so how is it that Indigenous people or Métis people get dispossessed of the land? And then how does that land come into the ownership of other folks, including, you know, so again, I don't want to, you know, but this is, you can Google this and this is written down somewhere, right? And so I'm not necessarily trying to single anyone out here, but this is the history of Canada, right? And so, Eli, you were talking about all of those actions that happened around, you know, the Métis Nation. So what can we do? And I always go at this 30,000 feet kind of thing. I do end up talking a little bit theoretical or talking more about values, because for me, it's about, well, here's some values and how might we then action out these values, and how might these values show up in our behavior? And so a lot of values that I think about is, I mean, relationality is always at the core of everything for me. Like, so being in relationship and always thinking about how can we be in relationship. And so when we go to figure out what might the solutions be, no matter what the solution is, please make sure it's based in relationship, that idea or solution was co-created or generated through a relationship. And I do interact with a lot of non-Indigenous people. I do take relationship building quite seriously And I feel like I have formed a lot of trust-based relationships with a lot of people in this city. And so I get a lot of calls from big leaders of big things in this city, you know, CEOs of some of the biggest corporations at times, who call me and say, I don't know what to think about this. Like, I don't know what to do about this. Or I heard this the other day. And so I'm a safe place where they can ask me those questions. And I, you know, do everything I can to not judge the question, which is hard sometimes, you know, because I'm human, hard not to get defensive about, because sometimes the questions can be kind of offensive, you know, and sometimes, because people just don't know, right? People have not been taught this stuff in schools. They've not been raised up with it, and they're not currently involved in it. So people really don't know. And so that level of ignorance at times can be hurtful to me, because I'm like, how would you not know about this? But the point that they can call me is what I value. And then we can have a conversation. And so then I can say, well, I don't know, here's my opinion about that, but I'm just one opinion. I'm always encouraging people to reach out to other people and get other opinions and have those relationships. And then, yeah, like whatever, you know, yes, please take action. Like, we all have to take action, because in my opinion, status quo is action, right? If you're going to be status quo, you're supporting something. And so I always push people on that too, right? To say, if you're choosing status quo, okay, but no, you know, don't feel like you're somehow not a part of this. Like, you are, even with a status quo decision. So I'm always asking people to stretch themselves, to try to get other opinions, to try to talk to people they don't normally talk to. Like, you know, I, in my earlier years, really only talked to people who looked like me, who sounded like me, who affirmed me. I didn't really want to talk to people who were different than me, because I would get too angry and then I would start pounding the table. And I still do that at times. But I hope that in age I've mellowed a little bit, and that I can be a bit more measured in my responses to things and my reactions to things. And so really taking to heart relationship, and valuing the relationship, and valuing the ongoing, you know, nature of that relationship, no matter what. And I feel like for folks who say incredibly offensive things, that when I am in a good relationship with them, and vice versa, I give them a lot of room. I give them a lot of space. I give them kindness, and which is back to this teaching of love. Love is about expressing kindness to one another, and about knowing peace and security. And so what are all the things we need to do so that people can experience love in that way, that they can feel the kindness, they can feel the peace, and they can feel the security. So to know love is to know peace, right? That's what you hear a lot with the Indigenous teaching of love. And so that's what I try really hard. It can be hard sometimes, right? When people have a totally different opinion than you, or they have a totally different experience than you. And the impatience that I experience when our families have to continue to fight these barriers, and just have to put up with ridiculous things in their lives because of these barriers. And they do it with such grace and humility, that it's very humbling to me to see that. And then I get angry, because then I want to go fight the world so that our families don't have to put up with that crap, you know? So that's where I get impatient about it. But I feel like the solutions to all that really is based in relationality, and that, you know, people have voice. And so let's create some space for that voice to. And so, like I say, Indigenous people have solutions to child welfare. They have solutions to justice. They have solutions to mental health. They have solutions to everything, but often there's no space for their voice. And I do think there is a bit of an underlying thought out there that, you know what, if Indigenous people really did know how to parent, they wouldn't be in the situation that they're in. If they really did know how to start businesses, they would have started more businesses. If they really, you know, understood how to be employed and have economics, they would have a job right now. Like, there's that thinking out there that boils it down to our individual capacity. And I don't have any scientific research here, but I think 75% of the time it's systems things that are leading to the outcomes, and 25% of the time it's individual capacity, right? So yes, as a parent, I always want to develop my skills, and so I need parenting tools and training and stuff like that for sure. But 75% of the time it's barriers that get in the way of my parenting, not my individual skills and capacities. And so I always want to make that point, that we can't, these numbers don't boil down to individual capacity. There is something else creating these phenomena in our society. So how might we center those voices, that experience? I'm running this thing called the Winnipeg Boldness Project, and it is a social innovation lab. And what I love about the lab and what I hear from our community is it's a lab that at its core understands we need systems change. So we're not a lab that's necessarily developing like the individual skill development stuff. There's an element to that for sure, but it's systems change. And so what can we do about systems change? And so really tapping into the community wisdom of our community to identify what the issues are and then start building those solutions. And then we need a whole lot of cross-sector collaboration to make those solutions happen. Because if our families had access to all the resourcing possible, they could make the solution happen, but they don't, right? There are policy implications, there's funding implications, like there are so many other things that are outside of the grasp of our families that they can't make the solution happen. So that's where we need that interconnectedness and that cross-sector collaboration to happen. And so I nowadays find myself in circles of philanthropy, and I'm learning that language, and I'm learning, the landscape of that. I find myself in corporate world, and I'm trying to understand that better. Understanding more about government. I come from a not-for-profit world, so I think I have a pretty good handle on the not-for-profit world and community organizations. That is something I know most about. Always can learn more. And so, but how might all of these sectors work together? Because again, I feel like a Western ideology, and this is the industrial complex, in my opinion, like we were trying to punch out cars, right? And so all of, a lot of our systems are based on that triangle. And so you have a person at the top who, or a command at the top, and then we need everyone below to follow that order, because we need to punch out the exact same wheel at the bottom. And so the bottom of the triangle, right? We need to punch out so a standardization, we need a standardization. I feel that our communities, so that's great for punching out cars and things, but that's not humans, but we've built all of our human systems on that triangle. And then we want the standardized product at the end that we think is going to fit every family, and it doesn't. Our families are asking for customization. They're not asking for standardization. They're identifying that standardization doesn't work. And at its worst, it's harmful. We need to customize. And so each family, right? How might we customize? And that to me is about values-based decision-making versus rules-based decision-making. That's about centering relationality versus centering transactionality. When you're in relationship, you can be highly customized and super responsive. And I love that the lab platform, which is resourced, intentionally resourced. I think our people have been innovating forever and ever, but they're not intentionally resourced for it. And the platforms aren't structured necessarily for it. And so we end up doing it under cover of darkness a lot, because we're not supposed to be funded to do that, right? But the lab is intentionally funded by government, and philanthropic and corporate. And so there's a bit of cross-sector collaborative nature there in the funding. And then the platform itself is opening up space to develop relationships. We spend a lot of time developing those relationships. It's not about transactional efficiency. It's about relational efficiency. And because when you have relational efficiency, you can dive into complexity, and you can go deep, and you can go fast. We hear this moving at the speed of trust concept. In transactional, you can spin around at an inch deep forever, and not get to complexity. And then transactionality tends to lend itself to a siloed approach. And I feel like circular thinking and holistic thinking and interconnectedness thinking allows us to get into complexity and being able to think about complexity in a more, because we're looking for interconnections and in complexity, right? Whereas I feel like transactionally triangle siloed thingers are all about keeping everything separate and apart. And in my opinion, that is not the way the world works. And so I love the John Burroughs stuff, right? Because he talks about, and I believe this to be true, Mother Nature and everything around us has a natural law to it. And so as humans, we can learn from that and we can set ourselves up in that way, right? If we can just learn from the water, if we can just learn from the land, because that's natural law. And you see those patterns. I love, fractal theories, and I love the Mandelbrot set. And I just think about that stuff, right? And if we were to set ourselves up in those ways, I think that we could really, be better at Minobamadzawin if we could operate in those ways. And so the lab allows for that trust building to happen. And when we have trust, strong, deep trust, that to me sets us up for risk taking way better. Help us if the risk managers take over the world. Oh my Lord, we're in trouble. And so then we can take on risk. We can, I think, operate from an intuitive place better. I feel like Western approaches really want to go based off logic. And in my opinion, logic has to catch up to intuition. And so if we allow space that intuition can come forward and thrive, I feel like that's where we can be way more responsive, and we can, pivot. We can, do in the prototyping process that we follow, we can just follow community wherever community goes. If this day they're saying that, we can switch it and move the next day, right? And so because we've set our platform up to be able to do that. I've also designed and run tons of programs for families. And when you get funding, you're kind of locked in. And if you don't do what you put the 12-month plan in place, if you don't do what you said you're going to do for 12 months, then you're a mismanager, or you're doing something wrong, or why did you veer from the plan? And then you have to get permission every 5 seconds if you want to change the plan. Try and get federal permission to change how you're going to spend $5. That'll take 6 months right there. Just to get the permission sometimes. So, being able to iterate, right? All of these things really link together. They're very interconnected, and, one begets the other. And so, which is, I feel we need more space for that. I think a lot of Western society is set up for that triangle, that planned, intellectual, logical, linear, sequenced, chronological stuff. We see that everywhere. I think we need more space for the other ways, which is more circular. You hear me say this a lot about thinking inside the circle versus thinking outside the box. Because in my opinion, thinking outside the box is still centering the box. I want to think inside the circle, which to me centers the circle, which is about holistic interconnectedness and always trying to understand the interconnections and trying to further support those interconnections, not separate it out with siloed stuff, right? And with linearity, right? There's so much circular here, whether it's circular or helix or, what have you, the metaphors. I feel like we're also trying really hard. So then that follows with the design of the prototypes, with how we evaluate stuff. Our evaluation tools are not great for these kinds of approaches. And so we're trying to design tools for that as well. And because at the end of the day, everybody wants to know what your impact is. Everybody wants an ROI or an SROI. Everybody, there's so many things. And what I love, I'm on the board of Animiki, and they're very connected to Raven Capital. And there might be some people on here who know them too. I love Animiki, and of course I'm super biased. They're B Corps certified, and I love all the pieces that need to happen in order to get that certification. And then they have annual impact reports that are on their website, and they're trying to measure the 7 grandfather teachings. So they're trying to measure love in their impact report. And I love that. And so you can imagine, how are we going to measure love, right? Just that question alone, where's that going to take us? How are we going to measure humility? How are we going to measure wisdom, truth, so on and so forth, right? I just love that we're going down that road and trying to figure that stuff out. Not all figured out now, but we're having the conversations and we're trying to figure it out, right? And so, and I feel like there's more and more of that happening across this country, saying, well, the current kind of infinite growth model is not working for the planet and for us. You know, we got to come up with something different, right? So you hear lots of things about circular economies, and there's other different kinds of approaches and solutions out there. So I think, you know, Indigenous approaches have yet to be tapped into. I think they're there. I think some of us know a lot about it. And I think Western society or mainstream society could benefit a lot more from these approaches if, you know, if there was opportunity to know what they are, to help create them and then to actually implement them. So boldness, when we get into that scaling conversation, that's the implementation. Community is going to come up with what they think the problem is. Community is going to start the solution finding process. We're going to build prototypes. And then when we have these scaling conversations, that's when we're looking at, like, we need lots of allies. We scale, there's a lot of definitions we use around scaling. So like getting it embedded into policy, or getting more resourcing for it, or just getting it better understood. Because a lot of people will hear things like, so all my relations is an Indigenous teaching, medicine wheel teachings, 7 sacred laws, grandfather teachings, what's the other ones? The like 7 natural laws of healing. Like there's so many Indigenous knowledge systems, and people hear about them. And in my experience, they get excited about them because it resonates. And then next thing people want to know is how do I do it? How? Show me how, or tell me how, or is there a book? Like, or is there a workbook, or, you know, is there instructions? Like, how might I do this? And so that's the next question we hear a lot of, right? Which is why we're having these conversations today, Eli, right? People want to know, how do we do these things? So yeah, I'm going to stop there again. Oh, and there's a question. So Eli.
I could just listen to you all day, Diane. Again, with the clarity. So we've got, yeah, Nigel has a question in there about, you know, is this just those statistics you talk about, is this really a Manitoba thing or Winnipeg thing because of the high population of Indigenous peoples? But I think the short answer is no, it's not limited to Winnipeg. I think it's what maybe some of these strategies were first implemented to quell and systematically oppress or stamp out the resistance, but they get mobilized, and that resistance has been in different forms right across this country as well, of course. And not only that, but then it's exported to places like South Africa, other places around the world. Indian Act politics and strategies have been exported. A different kind of social innovation export to other countries for many years now. And so we have another 13 minutes until 11:30. We'll continue on the main vibe of the conversation till the end of the hour. George Patterson has just joined us. This is our kind of little announcement for the first time that George and I are going to be speaking publicly about the sale and purchase of the Tofino Botanical Gardens. But as we move towards that conversation, and there'll be a lot of love flying around in that conversation as well, by the way, I want to, I'm just getting curious, Diane, and particularly because you've talked about your Anishinaabe roots and your Métis roots as well. Tomorrow, we're having a conversation about Indigenous identity. And we've been encouraged by Dr. John Burroughs, or I've been encouraged to have that conversation with love. And even in your preamble there, you kind of nailed one of the big things there, which is this whole Native adoptees phenomenon of like, how can I know who I'm connected to if I was taken at birth from my family and raised 3 provinces away from my family? And I think about the TRC and the Winnipeg Ballet, who co-produced that. The Royal Winnipeg Ballet and the TRC co-produced a ballet, Bringing Star Home, or something like this, about a young Indigenous woman growing up in the city who meets Tina Keeper, meets a homeless elder Indigenous man, and she learns through that connection about the history of what had happened to her family and her nation and such. But I'm okay. Anyways, punchline is, what are your thoughts on? Because there's like the Barassa thing that happened recently, where she had faked her identity to get funding for her education, and there's this one end of the spectrum where there are some people out there who are knowingly misrepresenting their identity for financial gain. And then this, oh yeah, going home star, nice. And then there's this other parts of the spectrum where there's people who have been native adoptees and such. Some people who think, oh, you're only native if you grew up on the trap line hunting and running through the forest with mucklucks and sweetgrass. What are your thoughts about this really hot topic that's happening today around Indigenous identity?
Well, it is absolutely dynamic conversation. There isn't, the other thing I wanted to say about approaches, which I think is relevant in this identity conversation, is the idea of polyolithic thinking versus monolithic thinking, right? And so I feel like a lot of Western paradigms want to boil it down to the thing, monolithic. And so even this whole chief and council business that's in the Indian Act, versus really how decision making happens in the communities, which is there's lots of people who have a lot of conversations, and so it's polyolithic, right? And we can't just boil it down to this monolithic thing. And so the identity conversation, I think, is pretty robust and it's great, and I think we need to have lots of it. I always hope with anything that we can have dialogue and conversations with a lot of love and kindness, and gentleness and patience. And so, with the whole colonization and the residential school experience, like we have lost a lot of our folks, right? And, there's the 60 scoop, which, our kids were like almost sold to the US, right? And they don't, and birth certificates were destroyed. And so people don't even know like at all, because there's no paper trail to for a lot of it. Church records, a lot of these things were kept in the churches, and which were all burned. Like a lot of documents were burned. So people just don't even know where they're from and can't actually find out, right? Because the paperwork's gone. So always wanting to be sensitive to those who were taken away, who were stolen, and are trying to find their way back. And yeah, being sensitive to the idea that, you might not have been raised up, by your people or, in your land, or maybe even anywhere near something that would look like an Indigenous culture, but that is still in your blood. Like you still are that person, right? That's your identity, or that's your lineage. But we do need to have conversations about folks who are imposing and who are not, like who are claiming, but really have no basis for that claim. We absolutely need to have that conversation and figure out how it is that we can hold, that kind of accountability. Because right now, as you're saying, Eli, there's a lot of examples right now of people who aren't able to fully identify, that heritage and that lineage, yet have benefited greatly from claiming that identity. And therefore, there's always the conversation about, well, if you aren't really Indigenous, but yet you're benefiting, you have now just taken away that kind of opportunity from an actual Indigenous person, right? So I think it's a great conversation. I don't think there's any one answer. Even if I just look at our Metis Nation, like there's a pretty robust conversation happening across this country about who gets to claim, who gets to be who gets to determine who's Métis, right? And I feel like in First Nations community, it's like your actual First Nation gets to claim you and say, versus any one, like, the Assembly of First Nations doesn't say who's First Nation, right? The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs doesn't say who's First Nation. It's the actual community that gets to say you are theirs, right? That you're a member of them. And I know it's very different for the Métis Nation in terms of how, and that's raging like from the East Coast to the West Coast around Métis identity. So I think we need to keep having the conversations. I think they can be difficult. I think there's lots of different opinions out there, and that there isn't going to be just the one. And so we have to be very versed in our knowledge and in our language around it, right? And there is all of this, there's a large diversity across Canada of Indigenous cultures. And I don't even know if sometimes people don't always know that. And so, and knowing that we're not all the same, and knowing that, Indigenous knowledge systems on the West Coast can be very different than Indigenous knowledge systems in the prairies. And that even how our relationship to Canada can be very different, right? Based on what nation you're from. So a lot of Canadians have no clue about any of this. They just sort of, so then the idea of using pan language like Indigenous, and Indian is still a legal term because we still have part of our constitution that's called the Indian Act. And so knowing those different, and then I think Aboriginal is still being used quite a bit. So, these pan terms versus like, I'm Anishinaabe from Scout and First Nation, right? And so that's the most specific I can get about my nationhood. So there is a pushback on the pan terms, and to say, no, like you identify yourself according to your nation. And then Eli, I've just been trying to be more sensitive to folks who I'm meeting more and more who are saying like, I don't know where I'm from, right? I feel either uncomfortable, or I feel marginalized, or I feel excluded when we get into those identity conversations, because I don't know, right? Because this is the way I was raised up. It's like, oh, where are you from? Who's your mom? Like, I want to know your last name. I want to know who your people are. And some people just don't know that, right? So I've had to really think that through and think, okay, how might I do that differently? Or how might I ask those kinds of questions? Because I do want to know who you are. And I find that a lot of our Indigenous, like when I'm around mostly Indigenous people, we don't go with our professional credentials. Like actually, we hardly even, sometimes that won't even come up. Like, what do you do for a living? That hardly ever comes up. It's more like, hey, who are you? What do you value? What are you about? Which is different than saying, oh, I'm the project director for this Winnipeg Boldness project, which I haven't really said a lot here. I apologize, but we're online. There's a lot of stuff online about Boldness.
Well, and what you did say was very impactful about problem identification, and that leads to more sound solutions, and then prototyping. So I'm learning. Yeah, so that's very good. And if possible, I don't want to strain your Valentine's experience too much, but if you can join us tomorrow, it'd be really lovely to have you join us tomorrow as well. We've got Will Goodon from the Manitoba Métis Federation, who's going to be, and admittedly, he's the first one to admit that he's a bit of a divisive character when it comes to identity and Métis identity. And then John Burrows, who's going to be bringing this Zaag'idiwin perspective on identity as well. So yeah, it'd be lovely to have your chiming in there if you can. And so as mentioned at 11:30, and I don't know, we were going to have, if Carl, if you're listening now, Cam Dennison is trying to sign on. I haven't seen him pop up yet, but this is the Tofino radio station that, awesome. The Tofino radio station, Cam Dennison is Tough City Radio is looking to sign on, because I said you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth with George and I talking about what's happening in Tofino with the Botanical Gardens. I was also hoping, it didn't work out today, but I was hoping to have Josie Osborne in the conversation as well, not so much in her current role as the Minister of Municipal Affairs, but more as her role as the former mayor of Tofino. I'm from Tlaoquiit First Nation on my father's side of my family. My mom's side, as mentioned, were Dutch Mennonite immigrants. My mother was born in St. Boniface, grew up in Manitoba, and then came out west in the 70s. But that whole part of my family on my mom's side settled in Tofino in the 1970s. And so I've got several generations of Tofetians, so to speak, on my mom's side of my family. And I've had my experiences working with the municipality, but this goes back to 1909. Interestingly, one of the restaurants in Tofino renamed itself 1909. And I was so curious as to why they did that, because that was the year marked by our elders as the year when the reserve boundaries started to be enforced. When the Indian agent came in the late 1800s and laid out through survey the Indian reserve boundaries, he made the comment that was remembered by the elders that, don't worry, these reserve boundaries are just a formality. No one's ever going to want to live in your lands because it's too harsh. The weather and the land is not good for agriculture. And so our people were given rest assurance that the nation could continue to live its life as it always had in our waters and our forests. But in 1909, those boundaries started to become enforced. If you went off reserve boundaries for firewood or fishing or anything, that you could face fines and possible incarceration. And so the relationship with Tofino has been, this up and down dynamic relationship. In 1984, when the provincial government had issued industrial logging permits to Macmillan Bloedel to industrially harvest ancient cedar forests on Mears Island, Wanajus Hilthuis, that also threatened the water supply for the district of Tofino. And there's deep irony in that, because the province has a fiduciary responsibility to municipalities in their provinces. And so it was the Tlaoquiit and Ahousaht peoples who stepped in and blockaded, challenged in court, and won to protect those lands from industrial harvesting, which also then included water supply to the district of Tofino. And it's explicitly identified in the 1984 Mears Island Tribal Park Declaration that we would provide water to the residents of Tofino. And still to this day, Tofetians benefit from a very high quality water from these ancient cedar rainforests that have been protected by our people. And so that relationship's evolved, and part of the evolution of that relationships comes with folks like George Patterson, who's joined us today. I've been getting to know George since, I think, 2006. So maybe, what is that, like 16 years or something like this, 15 years. I first met him on the board of directors of the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust. It was my first board appointment ever. So I was in full-on learning mode, and George taught me a lot about board governance and his vision for the biosphere and building the education sector, connections with other places around the world, such as Costa Rica and the Organization for Tropical Studies. And all those conversations stayed with me over the years and helped to kind of guide my my contribution, I guess, to improving the world, along with folks like Moses Martin, who's been he's my uncle and also our elected chief counselor for many years. and of course, many others who've taught me. Now I'm like a student of Diane Rusin. I've always admired her, but my God, I want to bottle that knowledge and insights that you bring. But George, thank you for joining us. We earmarked today as kind of to do our little announcement of the sale and purchase of the Tofino Botanical Gardens, which has become a very special place for many people all around the world. And of course, that the stewardship of that land goes back thousands of years, time immemorial. But I'm interested in for you to share with us, George, maybe introduce yourself and then share your period of stewardship of the lands in Tofino, and particularly the botanical gardens. So if you want to unmute yourself, we'll pass the feather over to you. You're muted, my friend. There's a little microphone looking thing. There you go.
Well, hi, good morning, everybody. I've got to apologize for my voice. It's kind of gone, so I'm not sure how long I'll be able to talk. But I want to thank Eli for inviting me, and it'll be nice to get to know the rest of you over the next couple of days. My very brief period of stewardship of the 10-acre property where I founded the Botanical Garden was really about 25 years that I owned that property. And for most of that time, I spent a good bit of thinking time of how it could get passed back to the Indigenous community here. And I talked to lots of different people over the years about how to do it, foundations, and directly with the local governments. But when it came down to it being necessary for me to pass it on for health reasons, Eli was the person who really stepped up, found the money for the transaction. And for me, it couldn't have been a better outcome. Eli and I had actually been talking about how he could be involved in this for about 15 years. So it wasn't an overnight decision or an impulsive decision. It's something we had thought about. I'm really sorry, my voice is going. Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So,
but I don't want you to strain yourself either, George. But feel free to say as little or as much as you want.
I might for right now say very little.
Yeah.
If you could pick it up.
Yeah, maybe I could say a few words of introduction of what I've got to know of George. George is originally a United Statesian from the United States of America. And fell in love with nature, I think, in his own way. The story I recall is a undeveloped lot that had kind of grown over with weeds and nature, which was actually his wilderness as a young person, and then extending that love of nature later in life and starting a city gardening business in Boston. And then after selling that, or in the process of selling that, spending time in Costa Rica at the Wilson Botanical Gardens and the Las Cruces field station of the Organization for Tropical Studies, where George was inspired by the Biosphere Reserve, for one, the connection there to the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve program, but then also to the kind of, I guess, methodology of the Organization for Tropical Studies and the field stations that they operate in Central America and South Africa, and then bringing that inspiration home to where he had married into a Canadian woman in Tofino, and where they had owned property there, to bring those ideas home from Costa Rica to Tofino. And so this, I think, was to a large degree a part of the positive intervention, because I talked earlier about 1909 and the enforcement of reserve boundaries and the sort of dark ages of our relationship with the district of Tofino and the province of British Columbia. But there was an influx of newcomers who had different values and who wanted to see more equity and more, I guess, like value-based relationality, as Diane speaks of. And so George was among those people, and kind of put his money where his mouth was, so to speak, and gave formation to this vision that he had for the gardens. The zoning of the property is for educational purposes, which is, I think, brilliant. I was very early on convinced that tourism alone is not a sustainable economy to base community health and well-being upon. In fact, it's quite dangerous to try to do that. The transiency of it, the fickleness of it, it's almost like speed dating colonialism, where we get increasing housing prices, where local people can't afford to buy a home anymore, and this huge influx of Airbnb on top of hoteliers is not a community-centric way of managing economic development. And so George's ideas around building the education sector and supporting more student involvement in Clayoquot Sound as sort of like a place of inspiration and learning, to not to stay forever, but to then take that experience back to wherever that you're from and make your world a little bit better and more balanced, I think, is really the opportunity that the property at the Botanical Gardens offers. And so what I committed to announcing today, well, because people have been coming around and wanting to do interviews with George and I, but due to a combination of factors, his health being one of them, we've kind of staved off the interviews. But today we want to say that we've purchased the gardens from George and Coastwise, and we intend to continue on in an evolution of the original vision for the development of the property, to continue on with investing in inspiration and educational experiences. The Isak Olam Foundation was the agent that kind of made all this happen, but it's the IPCA Innovation Program at Makeway Canada, which ultimately received the gift and purchased the property. So that will be in their ownership during a 3 to 5 year period of time that we're transitioning. I also offered to George, and George accepted a 3-year contract to be an advisor to us during this transitionary period. I couldn't think of a better person to act as an advisor for us. And obviously he knows the property inside out and backwards, but also his subject matter knowledge and expertise is going to be very valuable to us as we transition over this next 3 to 5 years. We're not looking to eradicate any traces of the initial 25 years. In fact, if anyone gets to know me, you'll know right away that I'm a nostalgic kind of a fool. And so I love, the idea of honoring in the past and, and building upon that and including elements of the Tofino Botanical Gardens that will live on in the new future of what we're going to do with the property in the coming years. As George mentioned, there was a period of time that my First Nation, Tlaoquit First Nation, was looking at purchasing the property. For one reason or another, that didn't happen. And in speaking with George and with his health concerns, he needed to do something. There was a lot of interest from the private sector, rightfully so. It's an exquisite property. With a lot of beautiful views down by the water and such. But thankfully we were able to pull together enough funding to do what we've done. The new name of the property will shift from the Tofino Botanical Gardens to the Nawayasum Indigenous Coastal Gardens. Now, there's one too many words in there, but there couldn't be any other way that I could put it. It'll probably be known as the Nawayasum Gardens in short, but we wanted to have the Indigenous and the coastal qualifiers in there to describe to people that it is a coastal gardens and that it's Indigenous owned and led. The Darwin's Cafe, as of tomorrow, will be reopening. The gardens will be reopening tomorrow on Valentine's Day. And the cafe temporarily for 1 year will be named the Little Costa Rica Cafe. And this is in honor of the initial inspiration for what George has done with the property. And it's also a bit of my stubbornness showing itself, because we had this big celebration. I had the ambassador from Costa Rica coming to Tofino for a celebration on September 15th, which is the date of the transaction. I think it ended up being technically the 16th, but we had everyone coming for the 15th. And then COVID threw us a curveball, and to weigh on the side of the caution, we ended up canceling the celebration. And so my stubbornness is kicking in and I'm saying, well, to heck with you, COVID, we're going to celebrate for a whole year now instead. And it's going to be the Little Costa Rica Cafe. I've got a friend here in Victoria, Benjamin Vega, who has the Pinto Express. He's a Costa Rican chef from Costa Rica, and he's got a fusion kind of Costa Rican Canadian cuisine that he's going to be bringing. He does this pop-up restaurant thing with Pinto Express combined with dance lessons, and he makes it a lot of fun. So we're going to have that. And then already I'm getting a lot of inspiration for the new name that will be the long-standing name of the cafe that will come on Valentine's Day at 2023 Valentine's Zaag'idiwin event. We're going to make that new announcement and officially change the name of the cafe. And it'll be a word in our Nuu-chah-nulth language, and it'll speak to the seasons because, of course, our diet in any particular part of the world, in fact, was meant to change with the seasons. And so we're going to be finding a word that is descriptive and appropriate, but also is relatively easy to say, to rename the cafe in 2023. The Eco Lodge, currently the Eco Lodge will become a learning lodge. We have a variety of programs. My foundation, the Isak Balam Foundation, designs curriculum. So we've co-designed a 6-week IPCA planning certificate. IPCA is Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, with the Vancouver Island University Masters of Community Planning program. I designed a 3-week course for the University for Peace in San Jose, Costa Rica, which is actually starting up in I think a week and a half. I'm going to be offering that program again. But anyways, just suffice it to say that the Learning Lodge is going to host a variety of educational experiences that will be focused on certain learning outcomes for Indigenous-led conservation of nature. The word Nawayasum is a Nuu-chah-nulth word that speaks about the transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. And I owe credit to Levi Martin for bringing this word to me. Years ago, we were talking about at the Eco Lodge at Tofino Botanical Gardens, we were having a design charrette around building the educational sector in Tofino. And we were sort of inquiring with Levi. He's one of our very treasured elders and a fluent speaker of our Nuu-chah-nulth language. We were inquiring with him about words around education. And one of the words that came out of that design charrette was Nawayasum. And the way he described it was, there was always these places in front of our villages where there were simple cedar hewn benches, where you can imagine an elder sitting on the bench with a young person, and the elder is pointing and speaking to the young person and passing on knowledge. These Nawayasum benches were places of observation, of ESOC, and the transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. And so I couldn't think of a more fitting word for the gardens, a place of learning and inspiration. So this is what brought us to Nawayasum and the Nawayasum Coastal Gardens as the new name. We already have a totem pole has recently been carved there that is destined to be stood up in Opitsat on Mears Island, Wanajas Hilthuis. And we have another log there that will be dedicated. And actually this Wednesday, in just a few days from now, we have a group of carvers that are going to be showing up, and they're going to be doing an initial kind of collaboration around the crests. We have a high level idea of the crest that we want for this new totem pole, but the carvers will come in and see what's practical. We got 26 feet of wood to work with. There's going to be a couple 8-foot totems that Joe Martin will be carving as well on site. We have funding for a canoe, a traditional dugout canoe. And I believe Joe's brother Carl may be wanting to bring one of his unfinished canoes to the site to complete there. So the place is just going to be exploding right away with the these master canoe and totem pole builders that are going to be giving new life to the gardens. And not, like I said, we're not erasing. You're not going to see a new paint all right away and all this kind of stuff. It's going to be gradual over 3 to 5 years, the transformation of the property. And yeah, I mean, that's the announcement. You're hearing it for the first time here. We're going to be hearing it for the first time publicly here. We're going to be broadcasting this announcement and really open to any questions that people have about it. The values that we've been talking about today with Diane really resonate out through my whole being, but in particular, everything that I do and will be definitely playing out at the property in Tofino. I had a conversation with Diane when she was here in Victoria feels like a few weeks ago. I don't know, maybe it was a couple months ago, but about a place where we could facilitate learning retreats and experiences in Indigenous owned facilities such as this. I'm already talking with George, and we're kind of envisioning how we could expand on our existing facilities, what we have zoning for and what we might need amendments for, and so on and so forth. So it's a very exciting time to be engaged in creative thinking around how we can, maintain the legacy and the vision and transform it and improve because, I'm only temporary here as well. And somebody else is going to be stewarding that property in, maybe, I don't know, maybe I got 50 years or 40 years left in me, but I won't go to the very end like George. Find a way to transition it in a good way. And so, George, do you have anything else you want to say at this point?
No, I think, Eli, you've covered it all really well. And I'm sorry I'm looking so somber sitting here. Kind of low energy today.
Yeah.
But no, it's very exciting. And I just want to say to everybody that I'm looking forward to the next 10 years of watching what happens here.
Yeah.
Seeing where we can build on the good and discard stuff that didn't work, but just keep working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, most welcome, and thank you for your stick-to-itiveness. When George has been so good, even during his health trials and tribulations, he's been responsive to me, and so I don't want to tire you out too much here today, but because we got a big day tomorrow, we're reopening, so you got to rest up.
Right.
We're going to be serving bagels, I hear, from Mount Royal.
Exactly. Day old bagels.
Day old bagels will be our specialty.
I am looking forward to it. And thanks a lot. I don't know whether, I think people should know that I'm sort of at the tail end of this cancer thing, and things are just about to start getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in 6 months from now, you'll be all refreshed and
no more gray hair.
No more gray hair. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, George. And I'll just momentarily, if there's any burning questions or comments, I've seen a lot of really nice messages in the chat. Thank you for those. I think, bit by bit, we're course correcting. This was part of the reason why I was really keen to have Diane on for this conversation, because Winnipeg is kind of one of those examples of where some of the harshest consequences have been felt by our Indigenous peoples. But to know that there's somebody as dynamic and bright as Diane, who's really also maybe stubborn in her own way, who's kind of hunkered down to make some positive changes there. It is happening from coast to coast. And I'm reminded in this moment of something that Giselle Martin said. Our history of our peoples goes back 10,000 years plus, 150 years of Canada. We're still in early contact. And so I look at 1909 in Tofino is when we lost our real freedom and control over what does or doesn't happen within our territory. And then 1984, the poster behind me, the Mears Island Tribal Park poster, that was only 75 years where we started to come back, with our hereditary chiefs and Moses and others who came together to stop that industrial logging of Mears Island in 1984. That was 75 years. Now we're I think, what is it now, 2022? So we're 38 years now from Mears Island. And I'm thinking, imagine 75 years more. like when we hit those markers, slowly but surely we're healing and we're restoring. And so I want to thank you all for joining us today. And yeah, and any closing words or comments, Diane, from you? No, awesome. Okay, well, with that, I'll say miigwech, kleko, kleko. Hi, thank you all for joining us today. And hopefully you can join us tomorrow as well. We're going to have a slightly longer agenda tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time zone. To 12 p.m. is going to be our first dialogue around love-based economics. That's going to be led with my relative, Carol Ann Hilton from Heshquiat, and she's been the driving force behind Indigenomics. And we'll have Megan Udelis, who's with us right now. She's going to be moderating that conversation. Megan is doing her postdoctoral investment with the University of Guelph, and specifically focusing on, how we can finance and bring economics to Indigenous-led conservation of nature. And Patricia Saulis, who's also listening in today, she's going to be a panelist with us tomorrow morning from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time zone. And then we're going to move into a slightly more prickly conversation around Indigenous identity. But I think with, the words of wisdom that we'll riff off of today that Diane has shared, and that actually even yesterday we had a really heartfelt conversation about identity, that we're going to keep that vibe going from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific time zone tomorrow with Dr. John Burrows and Will Goodon from the Manitoba Métis Federation, and Diane Rusin, getting her back. So yes, have a great day, everyone, and kleko, kleko, miigwech, chu.